name is Matthew Bashi-Kadlubowski, and I'm the Associate Director for Product and Sales Training with Educational Testing Service, which is located in Princeton, New Jersey. I've been in this role for currently 6 months, but prior to that, I worked in global client relations for both the TOEFL and GRE programs for 10 years, and then was the Associate Director for Academic Support Services for 1 year. Prior to joining ETS, I worked in admissions, enrollment, and enrollment management at the undergraduate, graduate, transfer, international levels, and also worked with MBA students for a portion of my time. The GRE General Test is the most widely used test for graduate school admissions. It measures a student's verbal reasoning skills, quantitative reasoning skills, analytical writing ability, and critical thinking skills. It's the most widely accepted test, and it's not only used for admissions, but also for fellowships and possibly scholarship purposes as well. It's open to anybody in the world. We are a worldwide test. And the nice thing about the GRE General Test is it is available to all majors. So students that are applying to, let's say, traditional graduate programs, in addition to, let's say, business and law school programs, can use the GRE General Test. Additionally, if students are applying to multiple programs, they have the option of using one test to satisfy all admissions requirements, which is, a huge, benefit to using the GRE General Test. Well, in the admissions process, the GRE General Test, or let's say standardized testing in general, is the only measure that is not biased. Meaning, letters of recommendation, you're going to pick people probably that are going to write positive things on your behalf. Your essays could have, information that you're providing, that may be biased. Information on a transcript, as we all know, different schools rate students differently. So really providing that information is good because it really levels the playing field and really provides the institutions with a really clear picture of that particular applicant and possibly how they're going to perform in graduate school. The test is divided between verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and analytical writing. Verbal reasoning, the students will have 2 sections. Each section will have 20 questions, and each of those sections they'll be given 30 minutes to take the test. Quantitative reasoning, they'll also have 2 sections. Each section will have 35 minutes to complete that section. And the test always starts with analytical writing, where the student will have 2 tasks. One is to analyze an issue, the other is to analyze an argument. Both of those tasks, the student or test taker will be given 30 minutes for 1 hour in length. The test itself overall is 3 hours and 45 minutes, plus time breaks. And students may also get either what's called an unscored section or a research section. If it's an unscored section, it's either going to be an extra verbal section or an extra quantitative section. And that's gives ETS the opportunity where we, let's say, test pilot questions. Before we put a question into production, it goes through about an 18-month process before it's released into a test form. If a student gets a research section, it'll be clearly identified and it's always last on the exam. And that, of course, is an optional section. It's where maybe ETS will test pilot new item types and things that we maybe don't have currently on the current exam. So in most cases, students are going to get the unscored section. That is really subjective. I mean, different students perform differently on tests, just like different students perform differently in the classroom. So let's say a student that may not perform as well in the classroom may do exceptional on the GRE General Test. So again, it's just another piece of information. And I always feel, especially for schools that use a holistic admissions process, that providing schools with the most information you can about yourself is really going to help, give them a clear picture of who you are and what your ability levels are. And really, you want to go to a school where you're going to be successful and flourish and hopefully graduate from that program. The GRE test, how it's scored. The GRE verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning measures are what's called section level adaptive. And what that means is the computer selects the second section of the measure based on the performance of the first section. So within each section, all questions, when the test taker is in that particular section, they all contribute equally to the final score. For each of the two measures, those being verbal and quantitative reasoning, a raw score will be computed, and the raw score is the number of questions that the test taker actually answers correctly. The raw score then on each of the measure is converted to what's called a scaled score through a statistical process that's called or known as equating. Equating accounts for minor variations in difficulty among the test editions, as well as the differences among individuals' tests that are introduced by the section level adaptation. Thus, a scaled score for a measure of quantitative reasoning or verbal reasoning does reflect the same level of performance regardless of which section was administered and also when the test was taken. So a test taker's scaled score on a measure is dependent upon their performance on the questions given and on the number of questions that they answered in the time that was allotted. Now, analytical writing is scored totally different, and analytical writing section of the GRE General Test, each essay is going to receive a score from a trained rater, and they use what's called the 6-point holistic scale. In holistic scoring, readers are trained to assign scores on the basis of the overall quality of the essay in response to the assigned task. And as I mentioned earlier, they're going to have to analyze an issue and analyze an argument. The essay is then scored by what's called E-Rater, and that is an automated scoring engine developed by ETS. And it's a computerized program that is capable of identifying essay features related to writing proficiency. Now, if the human score and the automated scoring engine score, or the E-Rater score, are in close agreement, the average of the two scores then is used as the final score. However, if they disagree, what we do is we bring in a second human and use that final score, and that will be the average of the two human scores. So the resulting scores on the two essays are then averaged together, and then they're rounded up on a 0 through 6 point score scale in half-point increments. At-home testing for ETS was introduced in March of 2020 during the pandemic. Prior to that, we did not have at-home testing. The at-home test, what is great about it is it's the same test. It's the same in structure and content and format, the on-screen experience. The major difference with the at-home test versus a test taken in a physical test center is actually the equipment that the student is utilizing, which of course is their own, and of course how the test is proctored. In a test center, you're going to have a human proctor, of course, or proctors that are in the room, whereas the at-home test is you have a live human proctor, of course virtually monitoring you in conjunction with what's called artificial intelligence technology. But the great thing about it for students that are thinking about at-home testing, first of all, the great thing about it is students have an option. So they can take either the physical test center test or the at-home test. And during the pandemic, it's really, it's a personal choice. It's whatever they feel the safest and most comfortable with. But it's nice to know that both tests are identical. It's just a different, environment in terms of where the test is taken. Whether the student takes the at-home test or test in a physical test center, there's no difference in their test preparation. We normally suggest about 6 months of test preparation before the student actually registers to take the test, but that again is a personal basis or a personal decision. We find that the average test taker preps about 90 days prior to taking the exam. ETS has excellent resources, and I always encourage students to start with our materials because they're not only from the person that administers the test, but it's also from the organization that creates the exam and of course writes the test questions. So it's really authentic material. Test takers can access that material on ets.org/GRE/prepare, and it'll give them both free resources and paid resources. The free resources are excellent, and I would highly encourage them to download the PowerPrep test preview tool, the PowerPrep online practice test, which there's 2 practice forms in there. We encourage the student or test taker to take them timed as opposed to untimed, so they can really get a more structured, simulation. As we know, doing well on the test is just not about content knowledge, but it's also about time management, speed, and accuracy. And one way to get that up is really by taking those practice tests timed. We also have a math review and math conventions. And we also have a link to the Khan Academy, which is really popular with college-age students. Other than that, we have additional resources for pay. The Power Prep Plus is a simulation that will actually provide them feedback on the answers that they've gotten wrong. So hopefully if they encounter a similar question on the exam, they may know now how to work through that particular example. It also will provide them with a score on the analytical writing section. So this way, again, they may know what their strengths and weaknesses are and maybe where they should focus additional attention. Regarding additional materials or support materials, we have various publications. The official guide is usually what I encourage students to start with if they need additional support. That's available in paperback and ebook format. We also have two additional guides. One is on verbal reasoning and one is specifically on quantitative reasoning. Both are retired GRE test questions, and they'll really help a student in preparation, again, for those specific measures if students are having difficulty, let's say, on one of those two areas. Again, the nice feature is that they are available in paperback and ebook format as well. In general, ETS recommends that non-native speakers prepare the same way that, let's say, an English speaking test taker would. However, we do encourage them to look at specific journals and publications that maybe will help them and enhance their performance. And a good place to start is the New York Times, The Economist, Scientific America, and the London Review of Books, for example. Normal periodicals that they may read, at a regular newsstand are probably not going to contain the level of reading comprehension that a student needs to prepare for the exam. As far as additional information or resources for students, I would encourage them. Recently, we started hosting a webinar series for students. So every month we have 2 webinars that are free and they're worldwide, and it'll give them information. One is usually is based on the overview of the exam, so it focuses more on, let's say, the mechanics of the exam, like how to register, how to prepare, basic tips and strategies, where the other is more of a deep dive, and it really focuses on each of the 3 measures. We usually bring in experts who specifically, their focus is on each of those measures, full-time, in their positions or their respective roles at ETS. So it really gives the student a really solid background on those 3 measures. And again, they can get that information again on the ETS website.